Hi guys, welcome. Sorry for the technical issue we were having. We're here with Mike Grabowski, and let's just jump right to it and get started and learn how to make your app React Native. Mike, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. Shall we start then?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so hey guys, thanks for joining me today. Again, sorry for the delay. I'm pretty happy that we've managed to get it up and running somehow. This is going to be my first webinar, so I'm really hoping this is going to be an exciting time together. The topic today was how to make money on your React Native app, but there has been a small change to the topic itself. Instead of talking about sizes in our apps, we'll more focus on specific SDKs and show how to implement not only native ads, but also other kind of ads by going through all the aspects of writing native modules. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mike, and I'm a React Native core contributor. I'm also a CTO at Costa, which is a startup that I've co-founded. That's all about React and React Native. If you are interested in learning more about today's topic or just looking for some help in general, let us know. So although the topic for today's talk is about making money on our React Native apps, we are actually not going to talk about the money today. We'll focus on what's probably most interesting to us as developers, which is how to actually go ahead and implement native SDKs within our apps. So before we start, we need to have an app that we will be testing these things on. And of course, the easiest way is to use React Native init command, which is a standard process. After it finishes, we should be presented an iOS simulator or an Android simulator with an app that's more or less similar to that one. Alrighty, so let's get started. Before we actually go ahead and write native code that's responsible for showing ads, we have to decide which network we are going to use. And there are plenty of them to choose from. I'm not going to dive into much details about that process, since it's often a decision made by the rest of the team based on the proposed revenue or conversion rates. Facebook Audience Network or the Google AdMob seem to be the most popular amongst our clients. So for the purpose of this webinar, I decided to go with the former, as not only the easiest one to set up, API and documentation, but also offers consistent API across iOS and Android. However, it's important to emphasize the fact that what we are essentially going to talk about today are patterns and approaches, not exact implementations. And that means if, by any chance you want to implement AdMob, for instance, it's going to be a matter of just replacing a few native methods with AdMob counterparts. So we've done that in the past, and it's been rather easy, and I'm really hoping that you'll be able to do that later on. Probably wondering from the very beginning is, how we'll actually use and render ads or even interact with native SDKs, given that there are no built-in. But if we do a deeper search, we'll quickly find out that we have native SDKs for iOS and Android. And all in all these apps that were done natively somehow display these ads that we see every day. The big question is how we can use that. Like, we are in fact making an app with React Native using JS, React, not Objective-C or some other sort of platform-specific tooling, right? So app is just like any other native app. The difference is that our views and logic are expressed with JS, where the view part is represented by a set of fully fledged native views. And that means we can follow the installation steps from all the above SDKs, just like our app was being done without React Native at all. So let's do it then. For the sake of speed, we'll be doing iOS-only showcases during this webinar. However, the code presented at the end will work cross-platforms, so you should be able to just copy Android part or use it entirely. So to get started, we will have to download the latest iOS SDKs from the URL above. You can find that URL by just checking the Facebook documentation. And then the general second step is to unzip this file into the Facebook SDK folder. That's usually in your documents. If you have ever worked with any other modules that were requiring Facebook SDK, chances are you already have it, so you can skip that step. Once we have prepared Facebook SDKs on our laptops, it's time to link it with our project. And this is the trickiest and longest part of the installation process, so I have decided to break it down into smaller steps. First thing is, we'll open our XCode project with XCode. This is what we should more or less see for the first time. If you haven't done any iOS development before, your first experience with XCode. And now, as in this example, we will have to create a new group. We'll create a group which is actually a folder. As you can see, these files in the left sidebar, we have the example libraries, example tests, and products. So these are groups. They're for the purposes of organizing your code. And since we are going to add Facebook SDK framework, we are going to create a group which is called a framework. Inside that group, we will place all the Facebook-related files and maybe other frameworks in the future as well. So next, after we create a group, as in this case, we'll have to drag and drop the frameworks from the documents folder that we have created previously and unzip the Facebook SDK inside. In this case, I have just drag and drop Bolt's framework, FB Audience Network framework, and FB SDK CoreKit framework, which are three essential parts of the Facebook SDK that have to be added to your project in order to make everything working. You will have to tell where to look for these frameworks, so that when you import them within your native code or require them within your native code, XCode will be able to locate them. We are pointing to Facebook SDK folder inside our documents, which is a recursive path. That means it will look as deep as possible just to find the files that you are importing. Next, after we have finished adding frameworks, we'll have to open the info pull list file, which is more or less like a package JSON of our iOS app. And inside that file, we will basically store an XML chunk. The only thing here is that we will have to replace the your app ID with the real app ID of our Facebook application that we will create. And finally, after all these steps are made, attach the above code into our AppDelegate, which is like a main file of our iOS app. And this line of code will just turn on the Facebook SDK. So this is the final result. This is how your AppDelegate should look like after you have finished working well, after you have finished all these installation steps. So what we can do now is we can hit the run button. Hopefully our build succeeds without errors, which is a success, and that means that our Facebook SDK is ready for our ads work to start. Now the problem that we have now is that we have linked native SDK, but to actually call it or interact with it from within our JS code. All in all, in fact, we have only a set of native APIs to interact with, but we still don't have any interface for the JavaScript to work with that. So that's the moment where native modules come into the business. Talking about them a lot recently, mainly as I'm still being impressed by how many cool things we can add to React Native IDEs. I won't dive too much into details how the entire communication works in React Native between JS and native, but if you are interested, I'll be posting some resources after the webinar so that you can read more about the internals of React Native and how's that working in general. The takeaway is that native modules enable two-way JS to native communication, which in most cases is async. Actually control native SDKs and enhance React Native features. So how we can actually start writing native modules? Because for people that have no experience with iOS or Android, this is often an answer. And when it comes down to writing native module is to look at the native API first and try to bridge it as closely as possible, making small adjustments when necessary. So what I usually do is documentation, and I check out all the things that are related to what I'll be about to implement. In this case, I have found three most interesting to me aspects of advertisements on mobile platforms. And these things are FB interstitialAd, which is an API for displaying interstitial ads. And these ads are the ones that cover the entire screen of our app. in order to display either a video or an image content. We also have the BeNative which is a native ad that integrates with the interface of our application, and it's up to you to properly render it. And the last one is the BeAdView, which is a standard banner ad, I guess the most commonly seen in the apps. So with interstitial ads, because of the fact that to me they are the easiest one to set up. And I didn't want to start with things like native ads because these things are complex, plus there's still quite a lot of things to sort out in terms of how to actually write a native module. So there's no tricky integration here because interstitial ads are actually just covering the entire screen of our app. So it's just a matter of a single imperative call. As in this example, we just have to call the showAd from root view controller. So that's everything we have to do. App will be to create a native module that will be about to do it. Let's start with it then. First step will be to create a new file. And we do so by right-clicking the group we want these files to live in. In this case, we have already a group called example. So we'll just put all these things inside it. After you click a new file, from the right-click menu, you have a list of types of files you want to create. Old selection here, the Cocoa attached class is the one you want to go with. So you just click next, and then you get the menu where you can select the name of your class and specify the subclass, which in this case we just want to specify a name. I like to call these files managers because to me they manage native code and usually have some state. So that sounds like a perfect name for that in order to make it organized. After all these things are done, we just click next and we get two new files. One of them has an age extension, and that's a header file where declarations about your class and its properties are living in, and these are public to the entire application. And there is also a second one with m extension, and this is the file where the implementation of your file is living in. So as of now, these are just two native code files. So we still have to tell the React that these are native modules that can be called from within JS. And in fact, a native module is just an Objective-C class that implements the RCT bridge module protocol. If you are wondering, it's an abbreviation of React. And we specify a protocol in Objective-C example. So we do that, we click Save button, and we go to the implementation file. But we see that there is a warning saying that there is some module name in protocol which is not implemented. This is because on the previous slide, we have specified that our class conforms to the RCT bridge module protocol, but the truth is that for now it doesn't. So it's missing, and that's what this warning is telling us. And we can declare it by attaching an RCT export module macro. It's an optional argument specifying name of the module, and if it's missing, as in this case, a name of our Objective-C class is used instead. Now that we have finally created our module, our native module, we can just go ahead and console log it from within the JS. Rather useless because there are no methods we can call. So I think it's a perfect time to start adding some methods. Let's go ahead and try implementing the showAd method. So we do so by wrapping our method with RCT export method, and that macro actually available to JS to be called. So now if we will save that and click run and console log the ad manager again, we'll see that there is the showAd method that we can call. The problem is, if you'll take a closer look at the commented line, initiate the interstitialAd instance. It requires a placement ID and accept it. So we'll have to go ahead and change it so that it accepts placement ID, and we have also made it promise. And now let's step here for a second and explain two things. What a placement ID actually is. So when you create your Facebook app in the Facebook dashboard, a placement ID is like a unique identifier, which is identifying a single ad unit inside your app. So you create placement IDs in order to group some certain ad types and do some other, interesting ad targeting concepts. And the second thing to explain here is that what these two extra magic resolver and rejector arguments are. So you want your native method to return a promise, you have to specify two additional arguments that are always at the end of your method declaration, and these are the resolve block and the reject block. We'll take a closer look again. There is still a warning in there, and it's saying that that we are trying to assign self to property that is of incompatible type, and that is because our object self, which is interstitialAdManager, doesn't conform to the FB interstitialAdDelegate protocol. In iOS world, that's a very common pattern of setting listeners on an object. In this case, we specified self because we want to be called when ad loads or when it closes. So we will just go ahead and interstitialAdManager conforms to this protocol. In order to make it fully working, in order to avoid crashes in production, we have to really implement all the methods this delegate protocol is specifying. So if we'll go to the documentation and methods, because there are 4 methods described, the interstitialAdDidLoad, interstitialAdDidFailWith error, click, and didClose. So these are the 4 methods that are specified. The first one, the didLoad, is called as soon as your ad is returned by the Facebook audience network and is ready for display. Because the process with ads in general is that as soon as you initialize your instance, like as soon as you initialize FB interstitial ad or FB native ad, you have to call a method load ad. And that method asynchronously talks to network servers in order to get or whatever that is to display. So access, and we have a field from server. The didLoad method will be called. From the server, there is network error, or for some reason there is nothing to show, the didFailWith error will be called. The didClick method, on the other hand, is called as soon as your user starts interacting with your ad unit. So for example, clicks it, swipes it, and the didClose method is called always, every time user dismisses or closes the ad. What we'll do for now is we'll just play it and define all these 4 methods and leave them empty. But as you can see, the problem here is that as our code, we want to perform some actions. Most typically, what we want to do, for example, inside a didClose method is we want to resolve a promise. We want to resolve the promise that we receive in showAd method. Is that there is no way to call these resolve blocks because they are living in a body of a different method, right? So in order to make this working, we have to create a class properties and store these promise methods on a class, these promise blocks. Assign them values in the showAd method. As in this case. And we'll also have to add the RCT assert, which is an assertion that makes sure that we can't call showAd more than once at a time. And that is a very, very important trade-off because you can't call showAd concurrently. But on the other hand, if you will be wondering, I'm wondering what would be the use case for this. Anyway, it's something to remember about in the future, because there are cases with other modules where it would make sense. So you have to think twice before actually going with this pattern. Another extra thing here that we have changed is that we have also created a interstitialAd class property, a reference to the FB ad. Because of the Objective-C way of managing memory and storing references. Important thing is that holding FB ad on a class property got deallocated as soon as the method returns. So in order to actually make it load and display on screen, we have to store a pointer to it so that Objective-C doesn't remove it in order to optimize memory usage. This is the initial bootstrapping that had to be done in order to actually start thinking about delegate methods that we have bootstrapped. So now we can go through them one by one and just logic. So as I said, the didLoad method is the method that is called when our ad is ready for display. So all we essentially want to do here is we want to call the showAd from root view controller, which will make the ad appear full screen over entire our application. We're going to use the RCT presented view controller util, which is a special util back into React Native that always returns the outermost root view controller. So that's basically it. Now you can probably just save your app, make it running, and in most cases you should see your ad appear. But still we want to get some feedback when something happens, so we will have to implement all the 3 other methods as well. So when an ad fails to load, reject a promise with an appropriate error code and message. In this case, we'll just pass a and the original description of an error. However, important thing to note here is that after rejecting, we are not actually cleaning up the promise blocks that we have stored previously in the showAd method, right? So if we will be about to call the showAd method once again, because there is still a reference to previous blocks living on a class. So in order to make it working, we'll have to create a clean up last call method that will do it for us. We have to remember about is to just attach this method inside the relevant other delegate methods, like in this case, inside didFailWith error, we'll just call the cleanup last call. The didClick is rather simple because we are just setting a boolean didClick to yes. The key thing about the didClick delegate method is that when you click an ad or when you swipe an ad or when you interact with it, this delegate will be called. Unfortunately, you can't resolve a promise because didClose method will be called anyway. So we have to somehow just update the state of current so that when we are about to resolve a promise from didClose, we know actually whether user was interacting with our ad or not. So as I said, this is just a simple boolean with yes, no value, and we're just going to resolve it with that value and cleanup last call. And cleanup last call is also setting didClick to no, so that when we are about to call showAd once again, everything is having an initial state. So that's all in terms of native code with the interstitialAd manager. And I think it's time to test things out. So the first thing to do is we'll just open index.js of our demo app, which is usually the only file we have after initializing a brand new app. Define a touchable called the show full screen ad method that we'll be defining on the next screen. And the show full screen ad method will just call the interstitialAd manager. We can do some console login in the then and catch handlers just to see whether there was a success or whether there was an error getting ads from the server. After saving these changes and running the app, what we should see now is our tweaked default React Native app that we have a touchable we have defined. So after pressing it, Facebook ad. So if we get to this point and if we see the ad, that means our entire Facebook SDK integration works well and all our native modules are working well. That's very important. Like some of you could be wondering probably why we haven't started with things like native ads or banner ads or stuff like that. So that's all about iterating over time. Like interstitial ads are the easiest one to set up. Super important if you don't have prior experience with native modules, and if you just want to learn some concepts, or if you want to learn how to actually go about writing one, that's the best way to start. have some, foundation with basic features. It's time to dive in deeper and, go about creating, implementing native ads, which we will do thanks to Native Ad Manager. Now, Native Ad Manager, like interstitial ad manager, so the first step will be to create files. And apart from the manager files, we'll be also creating the view files. In this case, we have created a native ad view and manager. The interstitial ad manager, this time, instead of declaring that we conform to the RCT bridge module protocol, we will extend the RCT view manager. In case of a bridge module that manages a native view. However, the implementation is still the same. We have to export it. However, instead of exporting a method like showAd, this time we will declare a special method which is called. And that method is used by React Native to get an instance of a native view to use. So if you render your native view with a JSX tags from JavaScript, this method gets executed in order to get a brand new instance of a native ad view. We already know that for most of these things, FB audience network, we need a placement ID, so we can declare a prop placement ID, which is a string, so that next time you will be about to render your view, you will just have to pass a placement ID as a prop. So created 2 additional props. One of them is an onAdLoaded callback, calling as soon as native ad is loaded from the server. Failed callback, which we will call in case of no fill or network error. And again, we could just go to JavaScript, obtain an instance of our native ad view, and just console log it. Or it still doesn't do anything, so open up the native ad view file and start actually defining the real functionality. So is we will have to define properties that we will be passing mapping the props to. Because on the previous slide, we have defined that we are exporting some props, that we are exporting placement ID and these 2 callbacks, but in fact, we haven't defined them yet. So in the header file, we'll be defining them so that when React is about to set them, it won't crash the app because of missing properties. To bootstrap native ad, override the setter for placement ID. It is because with the interstitial ad manager, we had a method showAd, so we were imperatively calling this method with a placement ID, and we knew that we have a placement ID and we can now show an ad. But in this case, we don't have any method to call. We just render our component. So what we can do here in order to know about placement ID as soon as possible is to override its setter. And that's how we do it. As you can see, it looks very similar to the interstitial ad that we've been implementing. There is also the init with placement ID method, and we are setting a delegate, and we are calling a load ad. So this block is exactly the same as with the interstitial ad manager. Assigning native ad to a class as a property so that it doesn't get deallocated. That's exactly the same case. Example of starting small. These concepts with easy interstitial API examples, and now if we are doing native ads, we already know them, so we can focus on other things to sort out instead of going through these basics. So we had the warning about missing delegates, so we have added the protocol FBNativeAdDelegate, and we have added 2 methods, nativeAdDidLoad and nativeAdDidFailWith error. And again, these methods get called under exactly same circumstances. The didLoad method will be called as soon as we have a native ad to show. With error will be called as soon as there is an error, no internet, or no field from an ad server. Now, as soon as we know about native ad, what we want to do is we want to pass it back to JavaScript so that our React components can, in fact, render them. Because the whole idea of using native ads with React is to actually render them with standard React Native components. so that you can be more expressive about how you want to lay it out or how you want to make it appear. So we have the didLoad method, and we have the onAdDloaded block. What we'll do is we will just pass back an object containing all the properties of like title, subtitle, body, social context. All these methods, all these properties are described in the FB documentation, so you can check it out. Probably some more stuff to export, but this is all I've needed for the purposes of demo and other apps we've been doing. So I'm not saying this is everything you can actually read or get to know from the native app. The next line we call register view for interaction. And this is the answer why we are creating a native add view that just passes a callback. Because we want to have a native view as a parent of our, so that we can register it for interactions. And that means as soon as you tap in the view or start interacting with it, this will capture all these interactions and will do all these Facebooky things like saving interactions, sending info to servers, taking user out of your app, or presenting some stuff. So this is all done. You have to register nothing like that. It just works automatically. And this is also similar in other SDKs. So if you will be about to do AdMob, it will be literally the same. So in case of didFail, we simply call a callback. For the sake of demo, I'm just resolving with an empty object because there is that much. However, if you will be about to do something more advanced, you can, and pass stuff like error code or description to present something to users. But in most cases, if your native ad cannot be showed under some, what you usually want to do is to just hide it, so that it's fully transparent to your users. That's all. Like our very, very simple native implementation is now ready for JavaScript code. And finally, so let's go. I'll switch to JavaScript part because we have done native one. And to test our changes, we'll create a small component called myNativeAdd. It renders a nativeAdd wrapper, which is that nativeAdd component we've been implementing all the time. And as we have already checked out, it accepts a placement ID prop and an AdLoaded prop. We also pass, like, the purpose of this onAdLoaded callback is so that we can actually store an ad on a state. As soon as our ad is loaded, we can set state, and then we can update children of nativeAdd. In this case, we are just trying to render a text which is going to contain a description of our ad. We can save this file, hit run, and hopefully what we should see is that our ad integration works, which means that we have successfully managed to implement native ads. So it's kind of tricky, to explain all these things in a conference talk, webinar, or even like a hands-on video tutorial, because there's always some stuff to show. There is a lot of code to follow, and there's a lot of concepts to follow. It's even tricky to follow, with coding as someone speaking. What we have, something that we knew at the beginning. And also we knew that super interesting things like banner ads or ad settings and ways of optimizing these ads, these are the things that we won't be able to show, including Android as well. So to actually gather all these efforts into one place and make it open source, it's been live for like a couple of days already, and you can see it there. You can download the React Native FB Ads package from NPM. The official example that you can see inside this repo is exactly the app that we've been creating today. And the iOS implementation is the same as showed on the slides. So if you want to and do the implementation from scratch, slide by slide, in order to practice, you can pretty much do it. And you can compare your efforts with this code. or even use it without even checking out. But the thing is that it has a lot of additional features that I was unable to show during this webinar. For example, one of the biggest concerns with native ads was that during them, like in our example, it's okay, we have just a single native ad. But in case of like a list view, where we have to render like 100 ads inside a huge infinity scroll, these callback things might get pretty messy, and in case of failures, it might be kind of tricky to debug it. So the implementation that we have in this repo is perfectly optimized for these use cases. It's slightly different from what we've been doing today, but it's also more complex. So if you'd like to, so if that sounds like a use case for your app, that's definitely something you'll be interested in checking out. So again, thank you very much for joining in today. And if you'll have any questions, just shoot me on Twitter or open issues in the GitHub repo. I'll be happy to answer them and guide you through other ad-related things.
Perfect. I just want to make sure that we don't have any questions from anybody. And well, thank you, Mike, for such a great presentation on React Native. And thank you guys for joining us in another webinar series with BeMyApp. Don't forget to stay up to date with our newsletters by registering at community.bemyapp.com. See you next time, guys. Cheers. Thank you. Hello.